Radical Love Live is a member of the Choircast Network. This is Radical Love Live, an ongoing series of conversations with thought leaders exploring faith outside the boxes, hosted by Mark Dilcomb and Kelly Wilson.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Kelly.
How are you today?
I am freaking awesome as always.
That's so good to hear.
Yeah.
That's so good to hear. What have you been up to?
So Roy and I were up in Cape for our annual visit to Provincetown. That's something we love to do over Labor Day.
Good times.
And it was, I love it up there. Provincetown is the perfect mashup of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been to P-Town?
Yeah.
So then
We've been up there as a family.
Very cool, right? And so it's great because you can bring your family up there. It's not everybody's cup of tea because, if you're thinking it's going to be a singular kind of experience, that's not Provincetown, right?
Mm-hmm.
Commercial Street is the main drag through the town, and you're going to get it all. It is a mashup of humanity. It's the locals. It's, people that are up there for the week, or the people for season, the people who come for a day. And, you're going to have all kinds of folks walking up and down the street and the restaurants, and, you got your families, and you got drag queens, and it is a little bit of everything. And I love that. Right.
It is. Well, and that's, when we travel, sometimes there are towns where I feel like not safe, and where like things are very restrictive or whatever. That's one of those places where I feel like you can just kind of be yourself.
You can be yourself in Provincetown. That is true. And that should be their mantra. So I'm doing well. It's great, to get back in the groove. So how about you, my friend? How are you doing?
Good. Still kind of recovering from vacation. I'm still getting back into
get back in the groove.
Business and stuff like that, making money, capitalism, all that stuff. But,
the stuff that pays the bills,
but
I guess.
Still holding on to, the spirituality that I got there, walks on the beach.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
I'll hang on to it.
Yeah, mostly in the evening, so I get sunburned.
I will tell you. So one other reason why I think I'm doing well is I went back to the swimming pool about 6 weeks ago, and it is the best thing I've done for myself, both physically, emotionally, and spiritually. So I was kind of called out by a couple of people close to me about, what am I doing to keep my spiritual practice going? Because I've got a lot going on between this and Divine All Along and et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, well, very busy. So for me personally, swimming is my favorite physical activity, but it is also an opportunity for me to meditate. That's when I can actually just be in the moment, and it works. And so I'm very grateful that I'm doing that as well. So I just put that out there for anybody that's, can you do some physical activity and meditate? Well, of course, people do it through walking and
I love walking as a meditation. There's something very holy. Got my feet on the ground.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a reason why that metaphor is so often used. Like I walk with God, or I walk with Jesus, or my walk with.
Yeah, so I guess I'm swimming with the divine. There I am.
So, I like that. Yeah, I like that.
I just put that out there to our awesome listeners. If you are into swimming and like to do laps like I do, use it as a time to meditate and reflect as well. So, all right, my friend, what brings us here to this episode?
Today we are having a conversation with our guest, Jennifer Bird.
All right.
PhD, Dr. Jennifer Bird. She is, I'm taking a look at her bio right now. She is the author of a couple of or several books. The most recent is Marriage in the Bible. What do the texts say?
I know. I look forward to this. Is going to be a great conversation on that alone. Yeah.
I recently read one of her other books, her earlier books called Permission Granted, which is about becoming more acquainted with the Bible and what it really says. So Dr. Bird has taught in New Jersey, Texas, Tennessee, North Carolina, Oregon, and Virginia. She's got
she's working the map.
Coast. That's right.
Right.
And is she calls herself a public biblical scholar. I love that.
Oh, I love that. A public biblical scholar. Right on, Jennifer.
And you can follow her commentary and interview videos on her official co-hosted podcast. And you can find that on her website, jennifergracebird.com. There are a lot of other things I can say here, but I love this. No question, her favorite conversations include gender, sexuality, and marriage. We're definitely going to jump into those.
Yep.
And what the Bible does and does not say about them. So, Jennifer, welcome. So nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Uh,
It's a pleasure.
Welcome, Jennifer. All right. So, Kelly, dig in. I'll let you get this conversation rolling.
Yeah. Well, we'd love to just kind of start by framing the conversation around, your spiritual background and how you became interested in the work that you do.
Okay, great. My spiritual background is, well, I imagine many of your guests have kind of a lot going on, right? Many
Yes.
of us are not just walking a straight path to getting back to
Mhm.
the metaphors that you were using a moment ago. Yeah, I mean, Methodists are kind of middle of the road with a little bit of social justice going on, but
Yep.
Mhm.
I had my own swing into what I now think of as a very fundamentalist way of engaging the Bible
Okay.
and evangelical, but also like I was an evangelist, for 6 or 7 years. My family didn't know what to do with me, but the passion for walk with Christ and bringing kids to Christ is kind of what I was doing for a while.
Mhm.
Um, and And then, I bottomed out. I, kinda came face to face with being quite depressed, and,
Mm.
so things needed to shift, but I didn't quite know where or how. But, what's interesting to me about I'm trying to keep it to the language of my spiritual background here, but, my love for the Bible was why I did what I did in college and right after college. I was the organization I was working with. And but the way I read it at the time is very different than the way I read it now. And what got me to seminary initially was someone had showed me that there was a dramatically different way to read the Martha Mary passage story, and
Ooh,
it was
Mhm.
wow.
based on honoring the Greek in a way that I just didn't know was possible. And I can tease that out if you'd like, but I'm just for now just telling the story.
Sure.
Um, but and I thought that those are words from Jesus that are dramatically different. That literally, I had a moment where, like, I had a the universe kind of opened up for a minute and shifted and went back together, kind of a moment. Like,
Wow.
never had one since or before, like, but it
Right.
was big.
Mhm.
And so I thought, okay, if this kind of thing is possible because someone looked at the languages, what else is out there? What else am I missing or is possible? And I know that you've probably had a similar response, and I'm sure you talk to people who have similar, like, what else is possible if we go back? And not that we
Mhm.
can actually get back to the originals, but I think you'd get what my point here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, so my drive, right? My drive to if I'm engaging this guy, Jesus, and
Mhm.
I'm engaging these scriptures and using them to guide my life, I wanna have a better handle on what I'm doing, like, you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
that's why
Yeah.
I went to
Wow.
seminary. I wanted to study the biblical Hebrew and Greek. I had no clue what I was gonna do with it. I didn't even care because it was too important to me to do this thing, you know?
Mhm.
Just figured I'd figure it out as I got as things went along and, um, kind of backed into doing PhD work after that because as I don't know if either of you have like Master Divinity or I imagine you might, but the process of going to seminary for 3 years and studying things I didn't anticipate studying, church history and learning about how all those decisions were made and when the doctrines were, all of that. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much going on here that other people need to know that don't get a chance to
Mm.
come to seminary. And so
Right. Right.
Ah,
right?
yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and so I was like, "All right, I need to go get a PhD so people will take me seriously." Um,
Mhm. Right.
and then, of course, I just loved I loved that study. It was amazing, and, I ended up doing 2 different programs because it first one I went to was not healthy for me. It was too conservative,
Mhm.
um, but that helped me to appreciate I ended up at Vanderbilt, and I just every day woke up grateful to be there and had a fantastic time, and I loved every day of my work there, and it was great, and, um, so, there were a lot of things going on, I suppose, and for me, it focused around or it started around, women in leadership, women in the realms of Christian defined spaces, right? And
Mhm.
when I was very fundamentalist, conservative, evangelical Jen Bird, I mean, I did things like I changed my wardrobe and made it baggier so I wouldn't cause my boyfriend to stumble.
Mhm.
I told my mother, no, I didn't tell her. I asked her on the day of her ordination. My mother was ordained when I was in college.
Mhm.
And on the day of her ordination, she and I don't know why my family did this to us. I have 3 older brothers, a father, and they put the 2 of us in a car just instead of, like, someone else in the mix to keep things, like, nice. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
Everybody knew that I
Second
did not
class.
approve. Like, nope, everybody knew that in my theological framework, this was not okay what just took place.
Wow.
Yeah, and they put me in the car with my mother for a 5-hour drive home.
Oh,
Well,
wow.
And
and your
here's
mom is still living, right? She
Right,
did
that's it.
ride in that car, latch car trip? Okay, well, but
Yes,
I
no,
was this. Okay, keep going.
exactly. You could call her up if you wanna double check on this story, but what
Yeah.
I love is, like, my first comment to her is, "How could you do this, mom? Because it's against God's will for women to be ordained."
Wow.
I mean, on the day, like, it was a
Wow.
big deal, like, even I was
Mhm.
moved by it, even though I didn't agree
Even
with
though you
it,
didn't approve, you were moved.
I was moved because it
Yeah.
was amazing, but I still don't yes, and,
Wow.
like, talk about a wet blanket. Okay, so she tells me her story, and you can't argue with someone's story, right? And what I always say is, I'm just grateful she didn't push me out of the moving van. Like, she didn't, do what
Securely
she
marked.
right? Like, "You're my child, and you do not
That's
deserve
right.
to"
She took
like
He was like, "I
Yeah.
gave birth to you, so
exactly,
therefore."
right?
Yeah.
I could
Going to
I
this
mean,
world.
yeah, so I was silent and speechless for the first time in my life, and
Wow.
so, that's who I was, and I share that story a lot just because, A, she is still around, and we have we're in a different place now, and
Yeah.
we can laugh about it, but it just for me, it exemplifies how seriously I took it all.
Mhm.
How seriously I reread things because I grew up in a church that had ordained
Yeah.
women,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, yeah.
and
Like,
Yeah, this is
you don't
not a
see
new
it
thing to
so
the
this
middle
uniform.
wasn't.
Yeah.
No, I had female pastors.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
that's where I was with the Bible, and so seminary, PhD work has always been for me about a form of justice, right? What's happening here? This issue of you can label it however you want, misogyny, patriarchy. There are all kinds of elements of this issue, but for people of faith who need or want to be able to trust this collection, like how do you help them do that in a way that actually honors humanity, right?
Mhm.
Instead of bashing down people and their humanity, because who they are conflicts with what these ancient texts say at times. Um, so, I that's that was my motivation, I suppose. And so I don't know that I talk about or think about spirituality in the same way anymore. I do a lot of what you two were talking about. I do a lot of meditative time in nature. I actually find swimming to be one of the most delightful ways
Right
to
on. I got
yeah, for
another one.
sure,
Right.
right? Just
Cool.
you
Well,
because you're just in it,
yeah.
truly, right?
Well,
Yeah,
it's
you're
And just
beautiful.
immersed
God, it's
and
incredible.
sometimes it takes me the full 45 minutes or so to like let go of
Oh,
the
yeah.
day, but
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's be real clear. It's not like I hit the first lap and I'm in
right
instant deep
in a
meditation.
zone, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm not in the instant zone. It takes
No.
a moment to get there.
But
Right.
it's nice, right? By the
Oh,
time
it's
you
awesome.
get there.
Oh,
Anyway, and lots of long hikes, I'm that kind of spirituality kind of person, like, it
mhm.
just, moved, in my inner core when I'm in really great outdoor beauty, so
Thank you for sharing that.
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I'm curious about a couple of elements of that aren't in the questions I said.
Dig in. Go.
Is
sure.
I grew up in a really conservative evangelical background, went
Okay.
totally progressive, and I am kind of a theology dilettante. I've taken
Okay.
some graduate school
Okay.
theology, but haven't don't have that degree
The
there.
degree. Okay.
Every once in a while, my kid who's now 15 will come up with some surprisingly conservative theological ideas every once
Uh-huh.
in a while. I'm like, where did you
What
this
that's and
going? Where'd you come up with that?"
taught you that. Yeah.
I'm
Told you
curious
that.
Did you hear that?
about what was attractive about a more conservative
Yeah.
expression of Christianity when you were in
Mhm.
Yeah. What took you
this
there?
milieu?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was there were 2 things. One, it was the certainty, right?
Ooh.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
think a teenage mind in particular, right, in the developmental stage
Yeah.
that we were in then. I think but also in general as humans, I think a lot of people do appreciate or do like having knowing with certainty. And so the group I was involved with, the way they would handle scripture, right, was
Mhm.
very similar to what you might find in a church setting that was specifically very conservative and, reading things. So the certainty of what to do with scripture, and to know certainty about humans and sin and salvation and all the pieces, it that was attractive, I think, to me, as well as the energy. There was a lot of it was a very charismatic, I mean that in
Um,
the
Mhm.
not affiliated with religion way. I mean, genuinely very lots of energy, lots of fun,
mhm.
and so that was enticing and made, kind of sticking around for the message, easy to stick
Right, right.
around, and then you're kinda hooked when it's at least I was, right? These answers.
Mhm. Yeah, and
Here
it's
they
great
are.
to belong to a thing
Yeah.
too. Like I got a
Yes, the community of
I'm
Yeah.
part of
You
a
resonated
club
with the
and we
community. Yeah.
know
yeah,
what's going on. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Oh, thank you for that. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I hope that helps you, as you're saying, like, maybe that, to give some insight into
Yeah,
what your
yeah.
child is thinking about and encountering.
Yeah, and I do find that I know several people who do take great comfort in the certainty. I love wrestling with ambiguity and
Right,
holding
Right.
contradicting truths
right.
and
Yeah.
tension at the same time, and other people are like, "No, I can't."
Yep.
You know?
Right,
Like, if I have
right,
doubt about one page of the Bible, then I doubt the entire thing and my life falls apart. Like,
right.
okay, all right.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. It is one of those things that I am like you. I'm very much a seeker and explorer, and I like to break things apart and discover on my own. Um, I don't give enough graciousness to folks whose faith is not like mine. So I'm just giving a shout
Mm,
out to them that there's something to be said about somebody finding comfort and or whatever word works in certainty, right? As Jen is what you were just saying that took you there originally, right? And so I have family members in that space, in
mm,
particular, people very close to me. That's what works for them,
mm.
and I have to be careful not to be judgmental of them because I'm like, well, that's nice, but that can be harmful to folks like me because if when you start getting into the fundamental aspects, I'm like, well, what about me? But
Yeah, especially if they start writing it into legislation, because
wow.
then it's like, okay, you've
Yeah,
crossed the
yeah,
line
yeah,
from
across the
Right.
line there, exactly.
Yeah,
your personal
Yeah, yeah,
expression
yeah,
into laying
yeah,
it on somebody else.
that's
yeah.
right.
Which is one of the reasons why we're here with you, Jen, because you've written a lot about that. But I love the fact that you see your intent by this passion of yours, by your, as you said, bottoming out, and then you're going to, reconfigure or move forward, and this is going to take you on the track of seminary to explore, and for the process that ultimately has now led to the books that you've published, and you wrote them with the intent to actually share your what you learned in seminary, like to put that out to folks. Is that
Yeah.
accurate?
Yeah, so the
Uh,
the book Permission Granted, so it's this
Yep.
one, the
Yep.
orange with a
But
fun little peel back. That book came into being because, my first teaching position out of graduate school was at a school called, Greensboro College in North Carolina. It has a vague affiliation with the Methodist Church. It's not a strong, but because it does have that, then they do still have, biblical studies and theology and things like that.
Mhm.
And so it was a teaching school. So I had 6 intro courses a year in addition to other things.
Mhm.
So those were intros to the Hebrew Bible and the Newer Testament. So
Oh, wow.
36 intros in 6 years. So I got really good at having this conversation with my students, right?
Yep. Yep.
Bringing them into an academic conversation while honoring, where students who are very conservative are coming from, right? Finding a way to essentially to make it a safe space to ask questions
Wow.
to be curious, um, and name, I just was very, I'm an educator at heart, right? I take this very seriously. So I've put a lot of time and thought into it. Like, how do I know when I first encountered what we're going to talk about today, it scared the bejesus out of me. So
Mhm.
how do I do this with my students? So they're, okay, you're going to be scared, but hang in there. Like, how do we do that
Right.
well?
Yeah.
And I did, and so I became really good at that. And I had students from, throughout those 6 years come up to me and say, Dr. Bird, the conversation we just had today, I really want to share that with my family.
Wow.
I don't know how to do that. Like, I just heard it. I can't, and I was like, yeah, I need to write a book so you can do that, don't I? And
Mhm.
I want to share this conversation, like these 3 conversations with my youth pastor or my mom,
Right, right.
So so that was the idea behind it was, okay, I need to get to a space where I can just kind of download all of these, the setup for how to approach this conversation, and then a gentle informing and creating space to let people just sit with things, right? And so they can consider and perhaps reframe for themselves. So I'm making this longer, I suppose, than I needed to. But anyway,
No,
so
no.
that's the college where I was working was let a whole bunch of faculty go because, like many institutions, were struggling to keep the doors open. So
Mhm.
I was among those let go, even though I had just gotten the teacher of the faculty of the year award. And
That was their way of showing their
well,
appreciation.
it just so happened, right? They made the decisions,
Kind of
and
a
yeah,
unique way of doing it.
this is how.
You're
This is
so
the
awesome. We don't deserve you.
it's awesome. We don't deserve you. Yeah.
We don't deserve you. Goodbye.
That's great. But I went and lived in a friend's basement for a year,
Mm.
and I downloaded all of those conversations and refined them and turned them into permission granted. So it's
That's
yeah, so it's kind of topical. It's like, okay, the issue of violence, let's talk about it. Or the
Mhm.
issue of this, or, like, okay, how do you think about what the Bible is? How do you approach it? What do you assume that it is and is not? And let's talk about what it might actually be that might be a little bit more complex than you maybe have been told. And so a lot of that kind of conversation. And it's, my teaching philosophy is focused around information, understanding, that kind of language that we're going to
Mhm.
have a conversation. You don't have to agree with it all, but can you set aside your own thoughts, acknowledge your own thoughts and beliefs, set them aside for a moment. Don't kick them to the curb, just set them aside so that
Mhm.
you can entertain this new idea and
Mm.
let it be heard on its own. And then you can figure out what to do with it. So
Mm.
that's what permission granted is. It has been really helpful for a lot of people. And it's assigned at seminaries, it's assigned at undergraduate campuses.
Yes, it sounds like it should be.
And
It's
it really
really
does do a good job as a handbook to kind of being reintroduced to
thank
the
you.
Bible.
Mhm.
It's as I was reading it, I was like, 20 years ago, this would save me like
Right.
hours of of study. Uh, that Yeah, it really is. And when we were talking about it before, yeah, I brought it up in terms of deconstruction. You're like, I don't know if it's, I don't know if I would call it deconstruction so much as becoming better informed.
Yes, and that has been my response to the language of the deconstruction movement, the whole, from the beginning. And but I say that I try to say it respectfully because I get
Mhm.
why people use the language deconstruction, reconstruction. I relate to it on a certain level, but when I went through that, 20 years ago or
Mhm.
whatever, however long, 30 years, 20 years, um,
Just
yeah,
say the
it felt
20,
that
it's all
way.
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, I know, right? That's all right. I mean, they joke about it at seminary that the first year they just kind of pull everything apart,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
then the second year you're just kinda sitting in it, stirring it around a little bit, and the third year you put it back together, and
Yeah.
that's deconstruction, reconstruction. But my experience is I am better informed. I am becoming better
Man,
educated. And I think that is a very important reframe of what's
Mhm.
happening.
abso-freaking-lutely.
R
To your point,
Okay.
this, yes, I'm trying to form, it blows my mind that as followers of our tradition, right? Those folks who call themselves Christians or whatever they, however they describe themselves, identify. But there's such a lack of fundamental, objective education about what our faith is about and what's inside the book that makes this all go, right? Other than what is based on doctrine, dogma, and what comes from different points of view.
Tradition.
Yeah, and exactly, and it's like, no, there needs to be more than that. To Kelly, what you just said too, like myself, and I've often thought this in my own work that I'm doing is like, how can somebody have a deep faith if you really don't know your faith?
Well, there's that. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things about getting more informed about the Bible is I think there are a lot of people who feel like they don't have the time or the resources or,
Yes.
like I don't know ancient Hebrew. I don't know
there's that.
ancient Greek. I know what I hear on, across the pulpit on Sunday, and then I got to go back to work.
Exactly.
And, and I think even like as far back as, Thomas Aquinas talked about how the Bible has to mean something even to like the most basic believer, even the most basic intellect. But there's so much more to be learned about the context and even just, how many different people wrote the Bible in different times and different situations and different genres.
And that's all important.
It is.
Yeah,
It
it's
is.
important on how you read it.
Yeah. Well, and the fact that, for people who have the privilege to be able to go to seminary, right? Which is, I certainly am grateful, right? But I sat in it for 30 years and did a whole bunch of reconsidering, like almost constantly for 30 years. So yes, how is someone who is working at least 40 hours a week, right? Most people work more than that these days.
Yeah.
How is anyone supposed to be able to do anything close to that, right? You can't.
that's
And
true.
so yeah, how do you give meaningful nuggets? That's kind of been my thing in general.
Yeah. I
Is
like
ho
that.
Yeah, what can I get? What can I say that will be helpful to reconsider? And in fact, I'm working on a very, very short course on 4 things I wish people knew about Paul.
Mm, right.
2 different
Oh.
lectures basically on 4 more things I wish people knew about Paul and his letters, but making sense of Paul.
Uh-huh.
And it's that. It's like I want to give everybody everything, but nope, let's stick about like what are effective, helpful nuggets presented in a way that isn't threatening, but just something to think about, and then kind of creating some space for reflection, letting people, process it themselves, take it in. I don't know. I want to help people have a safer and healthier relationship with the Bible. And I think that primarily comes with having a more mature relationship to it, right? And not being,
Right,
and
right.
so
So, Jen, I love what the work you're doing based
Thank
on
you.
this. This is amazing.
Thank you.
Do you hear any negative feedback about like, whoa, what are you doing here?
Like, what's
Or
that doing to my Bible?
exactly.
Yeah.
Or are there any people who feel threatened by what you're trying to do to make it accessible and et cetera, et cetera? I'm just curious.
Yes, of course. I mean,
Yeah.
it's fun. It's kind of fun if you go look at the Amazon website for it.
Ooh, of
They're
course,
one of the
right?
reviews, there are a couple reviews like, she doesn't know what she's talking about. And I'm like, that's fine, right? I understand
Sure.
it's too much for you. It's not for you, is my thought. Right?
Mhm.
But there are also people and they're saying, I've been waiting for a book like this to be
Absolutely.
written my whole life,
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so
That's affirmation right there.
it
Yes.
does exactly. And that's the thing. You're not There are plenty of people I would love to have read it, but
Yeah.
only someone who wants to read it and actually think about these things is going to enjoy and appreciate it. So it's not for someone who just is happy with the way they do it, the way they engage it and think about it.
That's
This
a
is
good thing.
you
Yeah.
don't yeah, it's not about forcing anything on someone. But yes, of course, there are people that just think they come into my, my videos or whatever, make comments about being, child of Satan or whatever. I'm like, yeah, okay,
Oh,
that's fine.
you've been
Just
called child of Satan.
I've been called a lot of
Wow.
things. I don't remember.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
But yeah, people say
Good enough.
just ridiculous stuff. Quote
Mhm.
scripture at me about how misinformed I am or whatever. I'm like, I understand
Okay.
why you think that, and that's
All right. Well, I'm
just
just
keep
looking.
moving. Yeah.
Looking at your bookcase back there. I was like, yeah,
Mhm.
I don't. Is there a pitchfork or
Right.
are you sitting on your tail or
Or
anything else? Like,
smoke coming up.
maybe.
Yeah.
Yes. I am really glad that you said what you did about people wanting to find these things out, because I know that
Yeah.
in some of the writings and podcasts and stuff that I do, there's always a part of me that's like, I want to be able to disrupt the sort of calcification that happens, like it's like this rocky soil. I want to be able to dig it up so that people are curious. And I find that I can't make somebody curious.
That's right.
And that's frustrating, because sometimes I want to be like, aren't you curious? It's really
Yeah.
no, like, all I can do is put the content out there, and,
Very well said.
Finding
and
finding
they'll
that
get sometimes.
nugget, that hook, right? The best you can do is present some nugget or some gem from it, something that might hook someone, right? But beyond that, yeah, no, I'm with you, right? You can't make someone want to get why this matters.
Mhm.
Ev
Well,
Even when it's in their own best interest potentially,
uh,
right?
agreed. You're right.
Yeah.
I think there's a cliche. There's something about a horse and water.
Right.
Yes,
There's
indeed.
that one. There's that one. So this is probably a good segue to talk about your latest book.
Okay.
I'm sure you have some nuggets in there that are tantalizing tidbits for our audience to hear about as well.
Yeah.
So
Indeed.
Relationships and
sexual and stuff like that.
sexuality.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. So, all
Sorry.
right. So talk to us about this book you wrote.
Sure. It's called Marriage in the Bible. What do the texts say?
Mhm.
And it comes out of, actually it started, my focus on this topic came out of my time in North Carolina as well. So I was there in 2012 when there was a vote for state amendment to the state constitution that was going to indirectly define marriage as between a man and a woman.
Mhm.
And so I started going to some of the sessions, like people talking about this and what's their motivation? Like what's going on? What's their concern? And I heard a lot of people saying things like, well, the Bible says, or God's intention, that kind of stuff, and I'm like, yeah, that's not what it says. That's not what's going on there. That wasn't God. Okay.
Wow.
And so I ended up writing a Facebook post about like my frustration with
Wow.
the thing and how the vote went down. And someone who was a part of Huffington Post actually at the time, back when it was a bit more interesting, I'd say, he had a connection in the religion department or whatever. And he's like, you want to turn that into a piece? I bet they'd love it. And it actually went like I was trending on Reddit for a few minutes because of this piece on Huffington
Mm.
Post, which
Uh-huh.
was how Amendment 1 distorts the Bible or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And, several 100,000 views, which for me was like, what?
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, right.
There's a hunger here. And so that kind of got me started on this. Okay, there are a lot of people who still care about what the Bible says, even if they're not in a Christian space, right?
Yep.
Or
Mhm.
Jewish space.
Yep.
But they're also still informed by it, and they don't really know what's what. And so that, the next 10 years or so, I spent time predominantly in faith communities. So with UCC people, United Methodists, Presbyterians, trying to bring content to them to talk about, like, okay, I'm, to talk about this whole thing. And
Mhm.
informed by lots of different conversations along the way. But I am an ally. I've performed a wedding for 2 women, like that's, it's where I'm coming from. But when it comes to what the Bible does and doesn't say, I'm never interested in telling someone what to think or believe. I'm simply trying to do my best to bring some more information, shine a light on things.
Mhm.
And I'm in a place where it's okay for me if the Bible has claims that I think are wrong,
Mhm.
but what I'm gonna do is call that out as wrong and just kinda let that go. I don't need to find a way to make it okay. In fact, I think we need to stop doing that,
Right, right.
you
Amen.
know?
Yeah.
So, what the book is about is I had 2 different groups of people in mind as I wrote it.
Mhm.
One were specifically United Methodists and Presbyterians who were, as I've been writing this, having these votes that have split the denominations, right? Or
Absolutely.
Right. Between
Yep.
the global
yes,
Methodists
Yeah,
and
yeah,
non-Methodists.
right,
Yep.
right. So I had these people I grew up with in mind, like, are
Yeah.
they going to be able to read this and hear this? And then I had people on the very far left in mind who do not get why people care about what the Bible says in terms of marriage.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right? So I wanted to be able to reach them. Like, here's why it does have such a strong hold on people. Here's why it matters to them. They've been taught, people are often taught to misread it and to focus on certain words or language that's not actually in there.
Hmm.
Right.
So that, it's for a very wide audience. And the book itself is broken down into kind of three parts. One, the first 4 chapters I call biblical marriage with air quotes, and it's looking at the 4 primary passages that Christians will use, will be thinking of when they refer to biblical marriage. What do they mean by a biblical marriage?
Hmm.
Well, it's Genesis 1:28, procreative; Genesis 2:24, no sex before marriage; Matthew 19:4-6, no divorce is allowed; and Ephesians 5:31 and 32, this sacredness because it's being compared to Christ in the church.
Hmm.
And so
Wow.
that's the language. It's 7 verses in total, right?
Right.
And so each of those chapters then look at what's going on in that context, what's actually happening in the chapter, some insights that I hadn't even considered until I started researching, or looking into scholarship on it. So it was incredibly eye-opening for me even to work through this. And I'll share 1 or 2 key nuggets, as you said,
Yeah. What were
Please.
some of the
just to make it
surprises you found?
bring
Yeah.
it home a little bit. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things for me is that Genesis 2:24 is the verse that says, "Therefore a man will leave his father and mother and cling to his." You want to?
Wife?
Uh,
Maybe?
all right, right. And the two shall become one flesh. Well,
Mhm.
every single English translation will imply that she is his wife.
Mhm.
The Hebrew says she is his woman.
Ooh, that's
Hmm.
a difference.
It is, right?
Yeah.
Why is it different?
Because there's no sense of marriage in and of itself. It's just a union of 2 people without any other construct, right? Ding,
It
ding, ding.
sounds like
I
it's
just
more.
I just got a gold star from the
That's right.
professor.
Woo!
So
Yes.
is it more ownership than partnership? Is
This
that
is entirely ownership. Also, though,
No.
yeah, it's ownership. So marriage in the Hebrew Bible is when a man goes out, takes a woman,
Yeah.
purchases her, has sex with her to mark her as his territory. And
Yeah.
that's how everybody knows that she belongs to him, right?
Yeah.
And then the focus is on her uterus. Is
Yeah.
she giving him sons?
Yeah.
Well, but so it's both the issue of property, but it's also, and I think this is just as important, there isn't a way to differentiate between prior to being paired up and post. So we have single, married, we have fiance, we have language for our status in relation to a potential marriage, right?
Mhm.
They didn't. It was a man and a woman before and a man and a woman after. There was no husband. There wasn't a different word to say she's a woman or she's a
Yeah.
wife.
Yeah.
It was
Was
just
there a ceremony to run down to the courthouse or anything, or
right.
jump over a broom, or was
Well,
it?
even if there is a ceremony, they still weren't referring to humans differently, as if there needed to be a designation that she's his wife or
Yep.
or he's her husband.
Yeah.
They're just man and woman.
Yeah.
So we should, in fact, what I'm trying to get around to, I suppose, is this is true in the Greek as well. In the Newer Testament, you have aner and gune, man and woman, and any of those passages, like in Ephesians 5, when it talks about wives, be submissive to your husbands,
Yep.
it's actually women, be submissive to your men. We should remove all husband and wife language from the Bible, I think,
Wow.
because it misinforms. It tells us, it triggers for us what we think of when you see husband and wife. You see married labels.
Mhm.
We put a whole bunch of stuff on that
We sure
story,
do.
right?
Absolutely. Just
And
because of our current our
That's right.
contemporary notions
That's right.
and what we consider that. But if you were strip that away and put it in the context of the original,
It's
the writings itself, it changes it a lot.
They just saw it differently.
Yes.
Mhm.
And that is an important place, I think, for us to start, right?
Yeah.
Acknowledge that. Let that be what it is. I remember when I made the comment about a man goes out, has sex with her and therefore marks her as his territory. I remember saying that in front of these adults who helped rear me in my home church,
Mhm.
and watching one man just go totally red in the face. And I was like, "Yes, David, I meant that to sound like a dog peeing on a tree." And he's like, "But I don't see it that way." And I was like, "Exactly. I
Mhm.
don't want you to, but I want you to acknowledge that they did."
Wow.
And right. So there's
Wow.
no verb to marry. That's a fun one. In the Hebrew Bible, there's no verb to marry. Go through and anytime you see, he's marrying or he married or what, no, replace it with take because that's the language. The language is men take women. There are a couple other verbs that are even worse than that, like a
Mhm.
man dominates over a woman or lords over her or simply takes with force.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There's that.
So anytime you see, you know, so like for me, that's a big deal, right? Genesis 2:24 says a man's going to leave his parents and cling to his woman and the two become one flesh. Why in the world is everybody reading he joined and she's his wife? Because they're uncomfortable because in the next part of the verse it's implied they're going to have sex.
Mhm.
So that's where the
Oh,
sex
ding,
piece
ding,
comes
ding.
in.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So we supplant a contemporary word to make it, oh, well, then therefore, it's okay to have
palatable.
sex because they're already
It's
married.
it's
Yeah, it's in
palatable.
a
Yeah,
committed
Yes,
relationship. Maybe
exactly.
exactly.
there's romantic love
Exactly.
inside,
They
Oh, right,
right.
exactly.
which
They
which is
courted.
His sacred covenant,
Right.
all that
Yes,
stuff, right?
yeah.
yes, yes,
None
yes.
of that is there. And the same is true on Genesis 1:28. And again, this was it was shocking to me when I first realized
Mhm.
that I was reading marriage onto that passage. But, 128 says, it's be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. And I had always thought of that as being about marriage. But
Mhm.
in verse 20, is it 22 or 20? Yeah, 22, I think it is. God also says in the story, right? To the fish of the sea and to be
Mhm.
fruitful and fill the seas, right? Well, that's not marriage. That's just a
Well,
commentary
maybe it
on
was
what,
like the fish to get married.
Mhm.
right, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's it.
right. So all these centuries of
Mm,
saying that procreation is only appropriate in marriage is what's being put onto that instead
Mhm.
of just looking at what's happening in this story, which is, you know, talking about the orderliness of the universe and all this great stuff. And, you know, I'm going to make males and female. I'm going to make humans and male and female show up at the same time, and it go get busy populating the planet and have fun with that. And by the way, you're going to be vegan, and this and like, why is that about marriage? It's about marriage because people are going to pair up and get busy, but
Mhm.
that isn't actually marriage. That's just talking about what people do. That isn't God ordaining marriage to be between a man and a woman. That's a story talking about what humans do as humans, what animals do as animals, right?
Mhm.
So that isn't even talking about marriage, but it is you but rabbis started using 128 and 224 a couple hundred years at least before Jesus hit the scene to say this is what God intended for marriage. And the
yeah.
Christian tradition has embraced that and run with it, right?
Mm,
And how is it that Christian tradition then passes over a lot of the stories about concubines and polygamy and, Onan having to service his brother's widow and
Right. Yeah,
doing it poorly. Uh, it's,
yeah.
but those
exactly.
stories are all also there. And
I know. Yeah. So the second section to answer your question, but also like the second section of the book is called Marriage in the Bible. And so it's like, all right, let's look at all these matriarchs, patriarchs, laws, and adultery that are related to what we call marriage, and
Mhm.
let's look at, oh my gosh, Jacob, right? Purchases two sisters and he goes from no women to two within a week,
Mhm.
and the two women who were given as gifts going so he has access to four women to have sex with. He goes from 0 to 4 in a week. Um, like, yeah, no, let's be serious about that. Let's take that seriously. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, your question is right on. Like, it becomes convenient. Lots of people find ways to ignore that, or that was the old time, and this is, and all those kinds of things. And I, I think that instead of excusing it or saying it no longer applies, I don't find that very integrous, because Christians are still reading the Hebrew Bible. You still
Mm.
use it. You don't have the Christian tradition without the Hebrew Bible. So no, you don't get to excuse it away or dismiss it. You need to wrestle with it, or you need to reckon with what's going on, I think.
Mhm.
And then, looking at the laws that are on the books about for men, because the in particular Hebrew Bible is written by men for men. They aren't expecting women to be hearing this. So it's all about how a man handles his property, himself, which women can he have sex with, all that kind of stuff. But those are laws about that are kind of tangentially related to marriage that are in there. And when I kind of broke down the different laws into groups, I was like, oh my goodness, we have 2 laws repeated twice on adultery. We
Mm.
have, and that is also not what people think it is, right? Adultery is not about stepping out on a sacred bond or sacred promise. It's about a man having sex with someone else's property.
Mm,
It doesn't matter if a
wow.
man is married or not, is already paired up or not. Doesn't matter.
It's just the fact that he now had sex with
Right.
somebody else's
She's
property.
Yeah.
she's mine, not
Yes.
yours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And all of the want to make sure if I'm raising a baby, I want to make sure it's my, like, all of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
to that point, if there is a life created out of the sex act itself, that would upset the person whose property is like, wait a minute, now you're going to ask me to be responsible for the thing that is not mine.
Right. Right. Exactly. I
Wow.
mean, and you see that play out in the in the story of Ruth at the very end. I mean, like, it's
Yeah.
no one's hiding these facts.
Mhm.
So, yeah. So marriage in the Bible, what does it actually look like? What kinds of, hang on a second.
Mhm.
It's funny how I sometimes forget what's in there, myself, but, um, yeah, um, the third section, well, and then I think it's also kind of surprising. Again, there were a lot of surprises for me as I wrote this. One was looking at the Matthew 19 passage, um, where Jesus is confronted, and the Pharisees say, "For which reason are you comfortable with divorce?" And he play, and the thing is that I didn't know until I was, again, doing this stuff, was he's not coming up with anything new until the very, very end of their exchange. At the beginning, he is participating in a debate that has gone on for hundreds of years, and
Mhm.
he's just playing it out with them. They're like, "Which reason do you like, Shammai or Hillel?" And he's like, "Well, neither, because I think you shouldn't do it at all." And they're like, "Well, but Deuteronomy 24 says you can." And he's like, "Yeah, but that's because of this." But none of that is just necessarily Jesus. He's just playing along, even if he does believe that. They're like, "Okay." And then his disciples are like, "Wait, the whole thing about lusting, and if you even lust after someone, you've committed adultery, and like
And
all this stuff.
flex your eyes out.
Yeah, and yeah. And his disciples are like, "Well, if that's the case, then it's better for us to not to marry it to begin with." And he's like, "Kind of."
Yeah,
And then he
because
goes on and has the commentary about eunuchs.
uh-huh.
And every
Right.
Yeah, some
Right.
are
yes,
some are made and some are
some are
Wow.
born that way, some are
for
made,
God's
and some
glory.
do it to themselves.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Anyone who can handle it, go. That's the paraphrase.
Yeah.
I'm like, why don't we have Matthew 19 booths at Promise Keeper conventions? Because
Whoa.
I've asked a couple men that who were trolling me. I'm like, so when are you going to go castrate yourself? Because
Well, and
Matthew,
there were Christian scholars that took that seriously. Well, wasn't Origin?
yes,
Yeah,
it was, no, you guys, it was such an issue the first 300 years that the very first decision they made at the first council of Nicaea
Yeah.
was, if you have castrated yourself, you are not fit for leadership. Nobody talks about that one. They talk about all the other decisions, theological ones, but it had
Mhm.
become such a problem that the
Yeah.
emperor is the one who calls this convention for these Christians to decide things about their theology. And the first decision they come up, the first one. Yeah. So no, people were taking it seriously. Um, but the other thing about that, which was surprising for me, was looking at and thinking about what eunuchs, how they were characterized in the first century. And it was shortly after the Nicene Council that that men in the church started saying that being a eunuch was akin to being celibate.
Right,
But
as metaphorical.
Yeah.
right, but
Yeah.
that isn't true. That has never been true. Eunuchs are many eunuchs, not all, but many eunuchs are very sexually active, and the reputation. I know, hang in there. The reputation. I love the looks on your faces right
Yeah,
now.
I know. Like,
Say
Like,
more.
what?
Yeah, good education. Yeah.
Yeah. Picture
Wow.
the mechanics.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Well,
mechanics, right?
I was thinking, I was like, how does that work?
How does that
Like,
work?
yeah.
Uh-huh. No, yeah, that's the thing. Okay, so there's so much to say here. Okay, so one thing is if it happens post-puberty, some men can still get an erection. Second, to say that you are sexually active and that all we think is penis and vagina,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
dudes, you got to expand your repertoire.
Well, that
Do you see what I'm
Okay,
saying?
there you go.
Right,
Exactly.
Right? Okay. So, I mean, there are stories written about wealthy women preferring their lovers to be eunuchs because it's a guarantee on birth control.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
You don't have to worry about,
You
oh my God,
don't.
am I going to have a
Yeah.
surprise?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So first century image of characterization of eunuchs was very different. It was,
Wow.
whether or not it's true of them all, sexually active with both men and women.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so let that sit in.
Yeah.
And they were often talked about as a third gender.
Yes.
It's
Mhm.
not a new thing, right?
Yeah.
So, and also lots of really negative, horrible stuff said about them. So when Jesus points to eunuchs and said, anyone who can handle it should do that, like, that is radically different than the way the church tradition has interpreted it,
Mhm.
I mean, that's embracing non-hetero sex, non-binary realities, bodies. What? Like, this is the linchpin that the LGBTQ community needs, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
And then
why you see people holding up signs about Matthew 19:12, but getting to that point of understanding why they're holding that up takes some work,
Because they have no context other than what they've been taught.
Right.
So your point is extremely well taken, which goes back to the original thing. If you're going to know your faith, you actually have to learn these things. And if you're relying on somebody out of the pulpit to teach you this, chances are you're never going to hear stuff like this, especially something that, it's not relevant, because that's what we do. We tend to push off anything that was back in the time. It's like, and then we just, cherry pick the scriptures that we need to make our point.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you don't get a lot of sermons about the passage in Acts where Philip gets like transported over to where the Ethiopian
Yeah,
eunuch
right.
is,
You don't hear about that, right?
tells him about Jesus, doesn't tell him to live his life a different way,
No.
and then gets transported away. Like,
Yeah.
okay, you
Right.
baptized him. The
Yeah.
job,
Teleportation. Yeah.
mission accomplished. But yeah, that wasn't a story where he said like, go and sin no more. It was like, okay, yeah, you want to know more about this? Here you go.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this is a provocative book you've written.
It's like a lot of fun. I think.
Wow.
It was a lot of fun to write. I know that we probably are wrapping up soon, but I will just say very briefly, the third section of the book
Yes.
Yes.
is called That Which Remains, and it's 3 chapters talking about ideas that are in the biblical passages that aren't necessarily directly talking about marriage or talking, but still have implications for the way people think about what marriages should look like. And so one of them is a chapter called What Are They Modeling? And that's a chapter that touches on some of the problematic passages that depict essentially an abusive relationship, abusive dynamic, whether it's between God and his people. In the prophets, which happens many times, God calls his bride, names, terrible names.
Mm-hmm.
Hosea chapter 2 is essentially like a boilerplate. This is what an abusive relationship looks like. And God is saying, that he's going to do all these things to his own people. I mean, it's really awful stuff, but it's also in First Peter 3. And so that, that section, the first 5-6 verses of First Peter 3 essentially sound like an abusive partner talking to his woman and telling her to behave, shut up, sit down, strip down your personality. I'm going to cut you off from your resources, all the things that happen. Endure abuse for the sake of this vision that we have going on.
Wow.
They hold up. This is the one time in the entire Bible for Christians that Sarah is held up as someone to emulate, and the context in which she's held up are the 2 times she's pimped out by Abraham.
Yeah, when he's like, "Oh, this is my sister. You can," or
Yeah, well, that
right.
aside, that's in the second version. The first, he says that, right? Say you're my sister, but the point is, she is then what? What is the verse in First Peter says? You're Sarah's daughter if you do what is good and are not frightened by terrifying things. So, what was terrifying for her? Being put into someone else's bed, right? Being
Exactly.
forced into this situation.
Exactly.
Where
More or
the
less raped.
Yes, or
Yes.
the threat of it at least, and
threat
that's
of- yeah.
terrifying enough.
Of course
And
it is.
that's the one time Sarah's held up as someone to emulate in that,
I could withstand this. I could do this. Yeah. Yeah.
so,
That's not.
what are they modeling is a troubling chapter, but it's an important one in my opinion. And then the final one is, only heteros. Like, one of the things that I don't hear people say is people will talk about the kind of the problematic element that the Bible is predominantly heteronormative. I'm like, this
Yep,
is
sure.
true. Let's talk about that.
Yep.
Let's also talk about the impact that will have on people emotionally and psychologically, that they only have hetero couples as their examples in faith
Yeah.
their entire life. That is going to have an impact. And I think we need to be respectful of that it does impact the way people think.
Absolutely.
And, and so why it is only hetero is one thing. The fact that it is only, let's look at that, be honest about that, take that apart. And, also the fact that the Bible misinforms us about sex so that people do think that a man and a man together is sinful because of these 1 or 2 verses that are homophobic in our terms, right?
Yeah.
So there is content that says that's bad, but that is because they don't understand sexuality. And so their scriptures are teaching people to misunderstand sexuality.
So well said. And being part of the queer community, I thank you for saying that, because yes, for me not to have something that I can hold up as an emulation of what is a relationship, a healthy relationship for me, is not there so much, or at least it's not explained. And so
Right.
automatically we're othered in that moment, right? Because for a queer person, we know what we are. We're born this way, and yet we have to then be remolded into something that's heteronormative. And it's not about a rebellion against. We just don't have anything to hold up. And so for a lot of queer folks who don't connect to the Bible or to their faith, one fundamental reason is exactly all these points you just discussed. Because I'm like, yeah, there's nothing in there for me other than abusive stuff. Like
Exactly.
I'm icky.
Right.
So
Right.
tell me how I'm whole. How am I loved? So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And, that chapter goes beyond, but does talk about Ruth and Naomi and
Yeah.
David and Jonathan a little bit. But also about ancient friendships. Like, let's take that seriously.
Yeah.
Ancient friendships sound like modern marriages. So let's be honest about that. If an ancient friendship filled most of the needs of a modern marriage, and ancient friendships were predominantly, almost entirely same sex, what does that do for you?
Absolutely.
I was
That
gonna.
reminds me of like Achilles that I was just talking about. We were on a road trip and we were talking. A song came on about Achilles. We were talking about Achilles and Patroclus, I think was his best friend who died, and he was just like, he was so mournful that he wouldn't go into the battle.
Yeah.
And it was like his,
Yeah, love for him.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
like the David and Jonathan situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
Like David and Jonathan.
Can I read just one little selection from my book?
Yes, please.
It's actually a quote of a different scholar, Marianne Tolbert. I don't know if you're familiar with her work on the Newer Testament, but it's So what she's saying is marriage partners share all things in common, as did ancient friends. Marriage should be a relationship marked by mutuality and reciprocity, as was ancient friendship. Marriage promotes honesty and intimacy, the faithful keeping of secrets and confidences, as did ancient friendship. Marriage partners are each other's soulmates, as were ancient friends.
Mm.
And marriage binds the two into one until death, as did ancient friendship. Although many forms of eroticism were part of the practice of ancient friendship, genital sexual relations probably were not, at least not in the stated ideal of friendship. Although a few Greco-Roman texts suggest that men and women can be friends, the vast majority of the references insist on the similarity of gender for true friendship to occur. Ancient soulmates were most often people of the same sex.
Oh.
So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot to say. I just wanted to
Thank you.
put it out there for you that it is more complex and it's also more beautiful.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, and thank you for doing all this work to
Yeah.
bring your scholarship to
Yeah.
to readers who to make it accessible for them, because this is all really important stuff to unpack
Absolutely.
the Bible. It's not just I always think whenever I go to a hotel, and I open the nightstand and there's a Gideon Bible in there, I really wish there was a user's manual with it. I mean,
Yes.
depending
How
on
to
what
use
page
this
you
safely.
open- yeah,
Yeah.
what page you open that up to, you can
Oh, yeah.
come away with a lot of different stuff.
Oh, you sure can. You sure can.
Um,
So, Jen, as we are wrapping up, thank you very much for your time. First of all, this has been a great conversation.
Oh,
It really
gosh.
has.
So, where do our listeners find you? We'll put it in the notes as well. But what's going on with you, and where do people find out about your work?
Great, thank you. The easiest way is to find all of the things is to go to my website, jennifergracebird.com. I do post on Instagram and TikTok every now and then. I try to
Yep.
do that regularly.
Yep.
And so those links are there. I'm also on Facebook. I'm an old person, so I'm on Facebook, and I use it to raise awareness.
I see there,
Yeah.
I see there all the time.
I'm,
so I'm
exactly.
right there with you.
I appreciate
And
it. Raising awareness. So I'm on Facebook. I also have a
Yeah.
YouTube channel, Jennifer
Oh, cool.
Bird, PhD. And I do a live stream on Thursdays. I started doing it a year ago, and I did it daily in the month of June, and then dropped back to twice a week. But it was focused on reading through biblical passages related to marriage and sex and all these
Oh,
kind of
how
things.
cool! And you're still doing this?
I'm still doing it, and it's just once a week now.
Okay,
And then
but still.
I've started having scholars on also to have conversations.
Awesome. Okay.
So
that's great.
it's called
Check
Story Time.
that out.
Yeah,
All right. Yeah, we'll put all these links
Yeah.
in
Thank
the
you.
show notes so people can come find you.
that'd be great. Thank you.
Oh,
And you did mention it briefly at the beginning. I do a podcast with a literature scholar. Her name is Jean Patrol. She teaches the Bible as literature, and so we teamed up, and it's called Wild Olive: Game-Changing Conversation about Literature, Culture, and the Bible.
Oh, wow.
And very
Okay.
proud of that. It's very, it's professionally done, not just like what you guys have done, I'm sure. So
Yeah.
not just a live stream on YouTube. It's an official.
No, that sounds great.
well-molded.
We got multi-dimensional
Yeah.
look at the Bible.
Trying.
It's got to be really interesting. Yeah.
I'm trying. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, that's great. Okay. Can you tell us what happened with the Mary and Martha story
Oh,
in a quick way? Because you
very
started
briefly.
that.
Yes. When he says, Mary, Martha, you're distracted by many things. And then what's next is the thing that changed my life. Way I had heard the next part was, Mary has chosen what is better. And what this woman showed me is the Greek upholds a translation that says that Mary chose is better. And the paper that was presented to me she was literally referring to me as a Martha who was giving in to patriarchal ideas and expectations for myself, just like Martha, doing the women's work instead of doing what I know I'm good at. And so the language of Jesus saying to me, essentially, Jen, it's better that you choose what you're good at than to play into these ideals. Like that was life-changing.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
It's better that she chose. She chose for herself.
That
That's
is
beautiful.
huge. That's huge.
Yeah, it was for me. Yeah.
Thank you for that. It's a gift.
Thank you for having me. This has been
Absolutely.
a very fun conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been very fun for
Yes.
us.
I'm honored that you brought me into your world.
Thank you, Jen. Likewise. All right. Thank you very much, Jen.
All right. Then thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Radical Love Live, hosted by Mark Dilcom and Kelly Wilson. Recorded at the Bravery Studios in Garfield, New Jersey. All rights reserved. Find our episodes on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And check us out at radicallovelive.com, along with our personal websites at markdilcom.com and kellywilson.com. This is Radical Love Live, where we explore faith outside the boxes.